Hi everybody, this is Devin Dombrowski, and in this video tutorial we're going to talk about how to update a record with the long-term history of a patient. So if you've been following along, we just did the initial exam on our dark-eyed Junco, and now we're going to pretend that it's a few days later, or maybe right now we'll pretend it's just the next day later, where we're going to put in our recheck exam that we've done on this Junco. But first, let's identify what continued care is, or long-term history. Long-term history, of course, could be the next day or 2 days later if it's a simple treatment for the animal, but it could also be weeks or months of care. So continued care is very encompassing to the truly long-term history of the animal. On the continued care screen, we have our identity information, which is the exact same information that we found under the initial care screen, as well as disposition, which is the exact same from the initial care. So the information on here that's unique is under the medical record fields. And the most unique fields in the medical record are the treatments fields here, where we can of course record the animal's weight and any treatment that we've done to it. So for example, let's suppose that it was the next day and we've gone to look at our dark-eyed Junco that has head trauma, and we've weighed him. Let's just say he weighs 28.7 grams today, and we've looked at him and we can say head swelling reduced, but nope, that's better, but eyes, good grief, are squinty. So this is just a simple little exam that I've done on this Junco. And now I'll update the record with that information. And you can see that that information has been put in a list underneath the treatments field. And the database has time-stamped it, so it knows exactly when that was entered in the database. And it's showing me the information that I've written in. Now, just to show you this further, let's suppose that an hour or so later, or whenever was as soon as convenient, my veterinarian got to looking at this dark-eyed Junco. And she could have written in, gave proper medications for head swelling. Of course, this is all very sophisticated veterinary speak. And placed in more appropriate. Nope, that's not right. Enclosure. I suppose your veterinarian would have a much better description of what they did than this, but I'm just going to write in something to give you an example. So now that is written in, and you can see that now that information has been put in the list, and it's been timestamped, so by default, the newest entry will be on the top of the list. Now, just for the sake of doing it, let's just pretend we're now a day later. And I've gone back to recheck this dark-eyed Junco, and I weighed him again, and he weighs maybe 29.9 grams today, and looking so much better. What a great veterinarian. And I'll go ahead and update the record now with that information. So you can see we're starting to create an actual record of what's happened with this animal. And we've been writing in very short and simple sentences here. I could write in here a full paragraph or paragraphs of information. So if it was a surgical procedure done on the animal, the entire procedure could be written in here. And of course, it then would be placed in the list. So there really is not a limit to the information you can type in here. And there is no limit to the number of entries you can put in the list. Now you may have noticed already that there's this graph weights link here. And we've entered in a few weights, including the admit weight of the animal. So if we clicked on that link, we can see the weight over time of this Junco. And of course, when he came in, he was 30, but he immediately dropped down a bunch the next day, but then started coming up over time today quote unquote, today. But if we did this many more days later, we could see the progression of his weight. So I'll go back to the continued care screen. The other thing you may have noticed is that these entries, once they've gone in, are in stone. By default, they cannot be edited or deleted. And really that is to support the idea in medicine that records should not be edited or deleted once the information has been written in. Traditionally, if it was on a paper record and you needed to make a change, you would put a line through the information with your initials there, and then you would write in the new information. So what we've chosen is to make this information not editable to support that behavior. But of course, the reality is that sometimes you really truly do need to make a change or even potentially delete one of these entries. So it is possible to do that. And I'll show you briefly how that works. If I go to the settings and I go to treatment record settings, I basically would want to fill these in to however I feel fit. So if I wanted to allow authors to edit their individual entries, I could do that. Or I could allow users of these permission levels to edit the timestamp or the actual value or to delete the value. And just to show you how they all work, I'll turn all of them on. I click on Update. So now if I go back to the continued care screen, there's these icons here now. And the little arrow twirly thing is for editing. So if I wanted to make a change to this information right here, I can click on that and now I can make changes. And I said that I wanted to be allowed to edit the timestamp as well, so that's why these fields are here. Or if I wanted to delete this entry, I can click on the trash can and it'll confirm that I want to do this, which I don't. So that would be how I could make changes. And of course, I am a super admin in my account, which is what I gave permission to. But if I wanted only super admins, I could leave it the way it was. And if I didn't want users to be able to make changes or delete things, they would not see these links here. The last thing on this screen that I want to point out is the recheck and recheck date fields and recheck type. This is a really helpful tool for the long-term care of the animal and really trying to organize what needs to be done on a day-by-day basis. So if I wanted to recheck on this Junco where I would say, you know, how is the head swelling? Gained more weight? Eating? Or whatever recheck might be. And then I could specify the recheck date. So I want to check on him the next day, for example. I could put in that date. And the recheck type is basically to denote who this recheck should be done with. So maybe the veterinarian needs to see this Junco next time. So when I update the record, that information is put in the recheck. And to see these rechecks day by day, there are two things I could do. I could go to rechecks over on the left. And that Junco actually won't be on the list right now because this is listing the rechecks for today. And of course, we said that dark-eyed Junco's recheck should be in a few days from now. But there are other rechecks on here, as you can see. I could also go to reports and print out today's clinic rechecks or any of these recheck reports, which essentially is a representation of the page we just showed you. And this, of course, could be printed out and you could take it with you throughout your clinic. Now there's one very last thing I will mention about the treatments information here. You could theoretically put in any information you wanted into the treatments field. There really is no limit to what can go in there. However, the reality is some information that you type in is unique, and it would be really useful if that information was searchable later on. For example, prescriptions or lab values. It would be nice to know what prescriptions were given to who and what doses, or for lab values, what animal's pack cell volume was less than a certain percent, and so forth. And if I were to write in here CBC for complete blood count, not caught by cat. And maybe the PCV was 35% and total protein 3.5 grams per deciliter and so forth. I could write that in and press update, and you can see it's put in there, and that's perfectly fine. But the reality is that it would be nearly impossible or very, very difficult to search that information later on to really get all of the dark-eyed juncos where I did a CBC on, which of course would be really special and unusual. But all of the juncos, or all the animals with a PCV under a certain amount or so forth. So there is a way to put this information into an area that's more unique or more proper. I'll briefly show you the lab extension. So if I went down and found lab and activated it. Now if I went to lab, which is the link is just showing up here and on the top, we're on the lab page for that dark-eyed junco, and I can enter in a CBC, and we'll just say that the date for that CBC was today, and PCV 35, total protein 3.5, and I could of course fill in all this information as I have it, and I press submit. So that now that information is written down here in this log, but a really nice thing is that information is also then brought over here into this log. Now this one here, of course, is the one that we manually wrote in, so I'm going to delete that one. But you can see that this information, which was written into the lab extension page, is filtered into the medical record here. So if I had this animal under care for weeks or months, and I did many CBCs, and maybe we did some fecal exams, and if we were using the prescriptions extension, we were writing prescriptions for the animal, they would all filter in here as well. And that information is now in a unique field where I can later search for that information for my own benefit. And of course you can see that there are no update and delete buttons here. And the reason for that is because that information came from the lab area. So if I needed to make a change, I could just come back here and make the change here. So really that's all there is to the continued care or long-term history of the animal for updating it. I hope that this was helpful, and next we're going to go to how to search for information about dark-eyed juncos.